How we deal with grief. That's the subject of a new play opening in St. Louis, and we'll have more on that coming up on City Corner. I'm Steve Potter. Welcome to City Corner. Precipice is the name of a new play that's opening very soon in St. Louis. It is written by Donald C. Miller and Elaine Ellis, and Don Miller joins us now. Hi, Don. Welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Precipice is a name, you know, when I first heard the name of your play, I thought, I think I know that word, but I'm not sure.
Right. Yeah, it's not a word I think we use a lot in everyday conversations. Precipice, of course, literally is sort of the edge of something, usually a cliff. So there's obviously a connotation there.
Well, when I did the opening for the show a minute ago, I talked about dealing with grief.
Mm-hmm.
So somehow I kind of see what's coming on the edge of a cliff.
Yeah, so the characters in the play, or at least the main characters in the play, are really at that point where they haven't come to acceptance of the tragedy that they're dealing with in their families, and that's, of course, one of the stages of grief, which a lot of people are familiar with.
Uh-huh. Don, you build a story as a story of love, loss, and grief. Mm-hmm. Are these things that everyone goes through?
Yeah, at some point, I think so. Some people go through that more often than others, and some people go through it earlier than others, but it's part of the life cycle. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
There are 9 characters in your play, I guess 4 primary roles,
mm-hmm.
right? And it's a one-act play.
Correct.
Let's talk a little more specifically. Now, later in the program, we'll talk about the individual actors and more specifically mm-hmm. about the storyline. But generally, when we're talking about grief and the loss, we're talking about the loss of young people.
Right.
So kind of give me an overview of where you're coming from on this.
So obviously grief for everyone is very difficult, but I think it's probably more difficult for parents when they lose their children, especially depending on the age. There's that old saying about, no parent should ever have to bury their child. So this deals with that to some degree, sort of the aftermath of that and how you grapple with that as a human, but also more importantly as a parent, I think.
Does it matter how you lose someone?
It does, and there's things that sort of prove that. It's difficult for people when they lose someone very unexpectedly, especially if it's a violent death. And also it's difficult for people to process many times when they lose someone to suicide.
Mm-hmm. Well, those are a couple things that are in the news a lot these days, are suicide by young people, mm-hmm. and also things like gun violence.
Right.
Just recently,
yeah.
a couple of mass shootings in the news happens more often than we'd like to think.
It does, and that sort of prompted me to start thinking about this topic. You hear it every day on the news, you hear it every other week on the news. I think we've had more mass shootings in this country and more deaths by that than what we've had in wars. So it's very upsetting. And then of course in St. Louis, we have a very specific issue with gun violence. It's very upsetting, I think, for a lot of people, myself included. And I do have a small child. And I think about that a lot with school shootings and things like that. It actually, I probably think about it more than I should.
Okay. Now, Precipice, your play, part of it has to deal with gun violence. Mm-hmm. That's just part of it, though.
Correct. Yeah, that's not the main focus of the play. There's 2 teenagers in it who die. One through gun violence, and the other through opiate overdose, which again is a prevalent thing you hear about in the news, and it's a very big issue in the country, in all areas of the country, really. It's not the focus of the play. The focus of the play really is on the struggle and the grief process and how different people are at different stages of that. It's not linear, and anybody that's read anything on that knows it's not a little check the box sort of process. So it really just kind of looks at people in different stages of that and sort of how they start to get through that.
How did the idea for this play come about to begin with?
Good question. So as a writer, sometimes I just think about different things and then I maybe make a few notes about it. And what I thought would be an interesting way to look at this would be, what if 2 people from 2 completely different lifestyles, 2 socioeconomic groups, et cetera, both had a loss, specifically the loss of a child, and how outside of that they maybe have nothing in common or very little, and how they sort of come together on that and maybe help each other a bit, and I don't want to say give advice, but sort of help each other through that process and maybe share some information.
So, am I understanding this right? In the play, is it that the mothers of two children that have died somehow connect?
Correct, exactly. It's exactly what it's about. They're the main focus of the play. The teenagers, obviously, that's the trigger, no pun intended, for what comes after that. But the play really is about, there's other characters in it, but the play really is about mainly these two mothers and sort of how they're dealing with that.
So do we meet these children before they die?
We don't. The beginning of the play starts with them telling their stories to the audience, and this is after they're gone, which is a bit of a spoiler because when you see it, you're not really 100% certain at the beginning when they're talking to the audience. It's a direct, breaking the fourth wall, so to speak. But that's not a huge spoiler, but they're just in that first scene to sort of tell their side of things and sort of what happened.
In your writings or in any work you've done before, have you ever addressed this issue before?
No. As I said, I think a lot of it is having a kid in this day and age in this country with shootings and accidental shootings and mass shootings. It's something that really sometimes consumes my brain when I think about how much our culture has changed and the landscape has changed with things.
Your youngin is I think 11?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Yeah, so just kind of coming of age sort of and getting out there in society. So that's really one of the reasons you were drawn to this whole topic to begin with.
Yeah.
Was it any specific? I know maybe it was things you saw in the news, but did anything happen with your child that kind of brought it home to you? I mean, is it something that he would talk about or see on the news? Or is this whole thing an issue for him?
I think to some degree it is. You know, we don't shield him from things. We like to talk about it, and he's seen several things on the news about mass shootings because, again, they're pretty common nowadays. And he doesn't say too much usually, but he gets very quiet. And we ask him about it. What are you thinking about this? What are your concerns? And he doesn't say too much, but I can't imagine being a kid that age now and not having that thought in the back of my mind. When you're spending more time with active shooter drills than you are with fire, you know, when we were kids, it was the fire drills and things like that.
And tornadoes.
And tornadoes, right, especially with the Midwest. So I'm sure he thinks about it probably more than he tells us, I would assume.
Actually, I'm a little bit older than you, and I remember actually when there was like a threat of there really wasn't a threat of a war, but bombs and things.
Right.
We had those drills too.
Yeah, I've heard of them and I've seen some of those, right, yeah.
Huh. Well, does your son, obviously, where your son goes to school, these things have not been an issue, I'm assuming.
Correct.
At that particular location.
Right.
But is it just because of what he sees on the news that he's aware of it? And I wonder if these are things that young people talk about with each other.
Yeah, I'm not sure. We talk about it in the house because my partner and I have very strong feelings about gun violence and ways to address that and ways to be responsible without squelching the Second Amendment. So we do. We have strong feelings about it. He knows that, so he's heard us talk about it.
It's that part of the play. Do you have a message? Are you preaching?
Not at all. When I sat down to write this with Elaine, we both talked about this beforehand. We do not want to make overt political statements, and you lose people when you do that. You don't draw in an audience that's for your Facebook page or for your other platforms.
No, please don't even put that on Facebook.
Well, and there's that too, yeah. But no, this is character driven. It's totally character driven. You don't draw people in with political, religious viewpoints unless there's a story there that you let people decide for themselves actually what they think.
Well, you wrote the play with Elaine Ellis. Tell me who she is.
So Elaine Ellis is the founder of True Community Theater, and I met her a few years ago when a mutual friend recommended me for a small part in a play that she did several years in a row called Less, about homeless people. All the proceeds from that 100% went to organizations that support and help the homeless. So, you know, social media, Facebook, we became Facebook friends, and we sort of kept up with one another. And when I thought about this play and putting it together, for some reason I thought it would be nice to maybe collaborate. This isn't something I necessarily wanted to take on by myself. I wanted to get someone else's viewpoint, and she works in a social services position, so she deals with these sorts of things on a pretty regular basis.
So what do you think you each bring to this project? Because I imagine it's two different things.
It is, absolutely. So I think Elaine brings an insider knowledge that I don't have as to what these people are dealing with in these situations where they lose children, they lose family friends, they lose neighbors. She deals with this. She's seen it firsthand. I think what I bring to it, not that we both don't, but I would like to think I'm a good storyteller, and I think that the collaboration forced both of us to step a bit outside of our comfort level and be able to take feedback on, I'm not sure this character would say this, I don't know that they would say it this way, what's the backstory on this minor character? So it really helped me flesh out more than I may have if someone else wasn't checking me during the process, and vice versa.
So back in the beginning, when you first contacted her, what was your first idea for this play? Because I know these things kind of evolve as you go along.
Mm-hmm.
So back in the beginning, what made you think of it to begin with, and how'd you start?
I didn't realize it until fairly recently. I think what really triggered my thought on this probably goes back to Sandy Hook.
Elementary school.
Elementary school.
Which was a famous mass shooting. How many years ago?
Yeah, in relative terms, a fairly long time ago at this point. But it shocked and saddened me that we did not as a country take action after that, because if something like that can happen and you still have lawmakers digging their heels and saying, everything's good, we don't need to change this, or we're gonna look at other things like social media and video games and things like that. It was, I'm not easily shocked, it shocked me that there was no action after that of any significance. So I think that's been in the back of my mind for a very long time.
Of course, I remember back when Sandy Hook first hit the news, it was shocking because it seemed like a very unusual thing to happen. And over the years, I don't know, is it happening more often, or are we just more aware of it? Well, obviously it's happening more often.
Yeah, the mass shootings are happening more often. And I'm sure I can check myself on this after. I think violent crime overall, I believe, is down, which is surprising to me, but mass shootings are up significantly, mm-hmm. and have been on the incline for quite a while.
Uh-huh. Well, how long did you and Elaine work on this?
About a year. Yeah. I mean, we both have obviously day jobs and things like that, so it wasn't an everyday sort of process, but it took a lot of drafts, it took a lot of conversations. Mm-hmm. It was a pretty long process, I think, or average maybe.
Did you ever argue about any big issue?
We didn't, but there were several times we did go back and forth on some dialogue and on some maybe some character points, but I wouldn't say we ever really argued. I think usually we either managed to convince the other that there's a really good reason we're doing this, or we ended up going, you know what, you're right, I don't think that works too well, let's look at changing that.
Precipice is the name of the play by Donald C. Miller and Elaine Ellis. It's going to open, and your first chance ever to see it, January 17th, and it'll play 18th and 19th at the Chapel in St. Louis. And we're going to talk more with Donald C. Miller about the play right after this.
Nailed it.
I'm Steve Potter. Welcome back to City Corner. Donald C. Miller is our guest. He, along with Elaine Ellis, have written a play called Precipice, which has never been seen, and will open January 17th at the Chapel. And Don, I've known you for a while.
Yes.
And in fact, you were on this program a year ago, or a little over a year ago, because you had written a book, which I have right here, and that is Coming of Age in Popular Culture. Was this your first book?
Yes, I remember the interview well. That is my first book, and probably will be not my last, but my last for a while. It was a huge effort.
It was really interesting, though, because you looked at film, television shows, advertisements. What am I leaving out?
Films, TV shows, musical artists, books from 1950 through 2010, all with a teen or adolescence slant to them.
And how it affected popular culture.
And how it affected popular culture.
Made us the people we are today.
Yeah, to a large degree, absolutely.
And now Precipice is your third play, I think.
It is a third play to be produced here
Tell me about the
locally.
first two.
So the very first play I wrote was for Joan Lipkin's Briefs Festival, which is unfortunately no longer here, but she did that for quite a few years. And it was the first play I had written, so I had the luxury of having my first play produced, and I think that spoiled me a bit because after many rejections after that to other places, I thought, what am I doing wrong? So that was kind of unique. And then the second play that I did was also a short, and it was out at the Webster Theater Guild, and it was called Open. So
there's a poster for the play, Precipice, and I asked you earlier about that word because I knew I'd heard it and didn't know couldn't exactly remember what it meant. And the definition again? It's
on the edge, essentially, and it usually relates to like on the edge of a cliff or something.
So when it comes to the play, how does the meaning of that word tie into your play?
So really all of the characters, maybe with the exception of the two teens, all of them are sort of on the verge or on the precipice of some sort of movement in their process, in their grief process. Not a resolution, as anybody who knows anything about grief. Again, it's not linear, and you can go back to stages earlier that you may have thought you evolved from, but they're all on the edge of something, some sort of revelation or some sort of movement. So that's sort of the analogy or the correlation.
So the play is about two young people who have died.
Correct.
And they've passed away when the show I'm not going to be able to put this right. We're hearing from the grave,
After
kind
that,
of, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Without anything too supernatural, it's not yet. But you're hearing their story of sort of their experience up to the point where they died.
And then later at some point the parents come in and how they feel, and it goes from
Yes.
What do the minor characters do, the rest of them?
So there's humor in the play, and that's very intentional.
That seems like it might be a surprise considering what this is about.
It is, but anybody who knows me knows that it's not a surprise. I think humor has so many benefits to it, especially when it's earned. When I say there's humor in it, these aren't jokes that are thrown in to give the audience a chance to breathe or exhale. These are character-driven. This is character-driven humor, and it's not over the top. It's very sort of innate.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the four main characters, which are the two young people who have passed away and their two mothers.
Correct.
And we have photographs of each character, so let's go one to one and tell me about the actors themselves and the parts that they play.
So this is Dan Haller, who is actually living close to Chicago right now. He's from this area. And Dan read for a play for me several years ago that didn't get produced, but I was very impressed with him. So he plays Noah, who is one of the teens, obviously. And a bit of the challenge of Dan working with me right now is he's in Chicago, so he's only able to come down for Tech Week when we do the piece, but I have that much faith in him that when we do things over the phone or video, that I've seen him in action, I know he can do this, so that's
You mean he's doing his rehearsals in Chicago?
He's doing his rehearsals with me over the phone or with the group. Yeah, that's technology, right?
Wow.
He's a phenomenal young actor. Travis Wiggins, another great young actor who, if I'm not mistaken, I believe graduated from Lindbergh High School several years ago. He plays Lawrence, the other teen, and again, just a great actor with some real range, so very impressive. Talisha Katura is a local actress, so people that have gone to shows in St. Louis are going to recognize her. Very strong actress, very accomplished, and just a few rehearsals I've had with her so far, very impressive.
And who does she play?
She plays Lawrence's mother, Gloria. And then lastly, Kay Martin Love, who anybody who's seen a show in St. Louis in the past maybe 10 or 15 years know. Kay Martin Love is phenomenal. She does musicals, she does straight plays. She's got a great range. She's a wonderful singer. Obviously, this is not a musical, but she is a great singer. And she plays Noah's mother.
So, what's the first scene? How does the play open?
The first scene, as you alluded to earlier, opens with the teens.
Both of them?
Post-death, yes. Telling the audience, they're not interacting with one another, they're telling the audience their story.
You mean, so one's over here, one's
Correct.
on the other side, and
Yes.
they sort of go back and forth.
They go back and forth and tell their story.
Are there any similarities in their stories? Are they just two different people with two different lives?
They're two different people with two very different lives, but the biggest similarity, and that's the focus of this, is that they both feel people have not seen them and people do not understand their stories, that they make a lot of assumptions for varying reasons about each of them.
Because of what happened to them, or for other reasons?
For a lot of reasons. The character of Noah comes from a pretty affluent family, although he's dealing with a lot of issues internally, anxiety disorder, et cetera, and he feels that people look at him and all they see is the external. They see the big house, they see the parents that drive the nice cars. They don't know or understand what he sort of deals with on a regular basis with anxiety and things like that.
So he's like the wealthy kid among his friends or something like that?
He is the wealthy kid, yeah, and all of his friends are probably wealthy as well. So there's
Maybe just not as wealthy as him.
not as wealthy as him, probably. Yeah.
So, gee, why would a kid like that have any problems, right?
Yeah, that's a stereotype, right? We assume that when the external looks great, that there's nothing going on. Why would you be upset when all your needs are met? Well, obviously they're not. So,
Without giving away too much, what does bother him?
he has a very rocky relationship with his father, and that drives a lot of, not all, but that drives a lot of his behavior, and it drives a lot of his unhappiness, as well as some of the unhappiness with his mother as well. So,
Well, tell me about Noah's mom.
so Noah's mom, again played by K. Martin Love, the character's name is Rachel, is one of those moms of a certain age and a certain decade that got married shortly after school, and kind of put a lot of her ambitions and things on the back burner to support the family, which is very prevalent among a certain aged demographic. She's very smart, she's very strong, and she's also pretty vocal about her emotions, and her husband is the complete opposite. Her husband, by the way, is played by Chuck Brinkley, who's a phenomenal local actor as well. He's only in one scene, and his impact just in the rehearsals we've done has been really strong.
Well, can Noah talk to he evidently has a problem with his dad. Can he talk to his mom?
He can, and he talks a little bit about that. But like, as I said, he has a lot of issues, and a lot of kids that age, even if they are close to a parent, one of the parents, you're not always going to hear everything. There's fear there about revealing things.
But gee, if he's got a nice room and his own cell phone and big allowance and stuff, what can bother that kid?
There's a lot that can bother that kid. There's a lot that can bother kids in general. This is a different age and culture that we live in now, social media. Peer pressure's always been there, but I think it's so heightened now in a lot of ways. And also, there is a physiological aspect to this. He's diagnosed with an anxiety disorder. He's on medication. This isn't just a kid that says, I don't like to take tests, or I feel weird at parties because I don't know how to interact. There's a literal physiological base to his source of his problem.
And do you want to reveal how he dies?
Yeah, because I think it's very important, and it ties to what I just said. It's an opiate overdose, which again is a big issue within within American culture, along with the gun violence. So it sort of makes sense with his character that's.
So I'm kind of reading between the lines. Is he self-medicating? Is that what it is?
Yes, basically yes.
All right. The other young person. His name is
Travis Wiggins is the actor. Lawrence is the character's name.
Lawrence.
Yeah.
So Lawrence is probably not like Noah at all.
Lawrence and Noah
anyway.
are nothing alike in most ways, except again for that commonality of not feeling they're being seen and understood. One thing we intentionally did as writers is to turn some stereotypes on their heads with these two teen characters. As you mentioned, Noah self-medicates. Noah, and this to me is not a big deal at all, but Noah uses quite a bit of profanity in his monologue to the audience. Not to shock, this is who he is. Lawrence is very clean cut. Maybe not, that may not be the best term.
Is he a middle-class kid?
He's a middle-class kid with a single mother. He's very shy, kind of nerdy, kind of a nerd, basically. And he had a plan. He and his mother had a plan of how his life was going to go, and they did all the right things, which is the source of his mother's depression. After he passes away, she says, "This was not supposed to happen to my kid. Not my kid. We did everything right. He studied, he got good grades, he was smart, he was good at math. He didn't do drugs, he wasn't in gangs." And there's a purposeful contrast there with the drug aspect, because you have the rich white kid who's self-medicating, and you have this other kid from a middle class or lower middle class family that you would expect to be doing those things, self-medicating, getting in fights, things like that.
That's the stereotype.
That's the stereotype that is turned on its head.
Huh. And how does he meet his demise?
So he is, and this, we read about this all the time, he's not killed by a police officer. There's no sort of altercation there. He's not killed in a mass shooting. He's killed just mistakenly or randomly. Somebody shoots a gun, he's hit, and he dies, and it wasn't even intended for him.
Okay, I guess there can't be a happy ending, and I know you can't give away too much, but how does all this wrap up at the end?
So again, the focus of the play is on the aftermath, especially relative to the mothers and how they sort of get beyond this. One thing that we did not do and we did not want to do is put a bow on this and say that, you know, you get to the end of these 7 stages and you're good, Steve, go on, move on with your life, get over it. The mothers each share their stories with one another in what I hope is a very powerful scene and a powerful moment. And they both start sort of making some movements in moving beyond this. And I think the term we use in the play is finding their new normal.
Yeah, I want to make a point too. This is a one-act play, and it's fairly short, like an hour or something.
It's 60 minutes, right. So great for people that are not maybe big theater goers. You're in and out, goes by pretty quickly.
And there is a charity that you're donating a percentage of the proceeds to.
Yes, so 10% of the sales will go to the local chapter of Moms Demand Action, which is a organization dedicated to finding common sense gun legislation and laws that will hopefully lessen some of these things that we hear about every day in the news.
I talked to you briefly off the air, and I just want to bring it up in the few seconds we have left. I know, boy, doing a play and rehearsing the holiday seasons, you said you had one actor in another city. This must have been kind of challenging, huh?
Yeah, it's been very challenging, and I really do feel blessed, Elaine and I both do, to have gotten such a phenomenal cast. These are all great actors, but it's very difficult pulling people together over the holidays to do rehearsals. It really is.
Well, Precipice is the name of the play by Donald C. Miller, who's with us now, and Elaine Ellis. It opens January 17th, runs through the 19th at the Chapel, which is right off Forest Park, the west end of Forest Park, right?
Correct, yes.
And you have a Facebook page, True Community Theater.
Correct.
Any other thing you want to say about getting tickets? Or?
No, I hope as many people come out and see this as possible. And again, I want to sort of dispel the stereotype or myth that this is a downer. I think there's hope in this play. That was our purpose, to show that there is, life does go on in some aspect after these sorts of things happen for most people.
Don Miller, great seeing you again.
Great being here.
And I hope everybody breaks a leg in January.
Thank you very much.
And I'm sure we'll hear from you again.
I appreciate it.
Thanks
Steve.
so much. And thank you for being part of this edition of City Corner. I'm Steve Potter, and I hope you'll see us next time. Bye.